For generations, strong communities were built through wisdom, faith, and helping one another. We believe those things still matter. The Haven Project.
Tonight is going to be basic backyard composting. And I stress that because, you can get very detailed in what you do in regard to composting. And I know Master Gardeners made a visit to Miami where there is a mushroom farm, and they compost. I don't know if you've seen the huge bales of hay. You know, they're, 10 feet long, 4 or 5 feet wide, 4 or 5 feet tall. And it's a whole different process of composting than what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we're going to be talking about what you can do in your backyard primarily. There is composting you can do on your kitchen counter if you really want to go that far. My wife, I can't even get close to the inside of the house when it comes to composting and some other gardening type things. So we're going to look at backyard composting. How many of you are composters already? Okay, several. Semi-composter? Okay, well, hopefully you'll get some information tonight such that, as was already said, you could literally go home tomorrow and start. At least I hope that you can. I hope that you will feel the freedom to ask questions. I'm not going to guarantee that I can answer them, but I will do the best I can and give you what little bit of knowledge that I think I have in regard to composting. So we are going to look at composting. What is it? Why use it? Who does the work? These are probably the three theoretical parts of this presentation. And the last part then, the mechanics, the actual, what do you do, how do you do it, and what's actually involved in it. And so with that, we're going to start off by looking at composting is recycling naturally. We are, and really the arrows, hopefully you recognize those as recycling. It's a recycling logo. And so what we're doing is that we're reducing the amount that we're putting in our trash cans that goes to the landfills that generates methane gas instead of something productive. You want to reuse the organic waste that you put in your, or we may be now putting into our trash. You want to save that out and use that for your compost pile and reuse it, and then from the reusing it, it's recycled into a form of fertilizer. And one of the things, I have a slide in here that will compare synthetic fertilizer to compost fertilizer and why you don't want to use synthetic fertilizer. Others have added a fourth item to this called repurpose. So you've got reduce, reuse, recycle, and repurpose. I don't know exactly how you repurpose your trash, but some trash, you probably have seen shows on TV where they've taken one person's trash and made a treasure out of it for somebody else. I recycle and I also compost. My compost is probably not one of those that I would say, here's how you do it. But it is a way that you can do it. And so my garbage went from a large Broken Arrow gives you an option of 2 trash cans, a big one and I'm going to call it a medium-sized one. We've gone from one huge trash container every week to the smaller of the containers every other week, plus the recycled blue bin. which happens every 2 weeks approximately. We fill one of those. But there's a significant reduction in the amount that goes into the actual trash and into the landfill. So so there is a benefit from that standpoint as well. So what is home composting? It's the controlled natural decomposition of organic materials into a nutrient-rich soil amendment. That's an academic definition, but hopefully you can read it on your handout there. But one of the things about composting is that it's an ever-changing process. It doesn't ever, well, it does finish, and when it's finished, it's called humus. Now, I made the mistake of calling it hummus, and there's a big difference there. So you want to be sure. I've got the U underlined to help me to know how to say it, but it's humus, which is a final state of decomposition when everything has stopped decomposing. All of the decomposition has been completed, and it's ready to be used and put on your garden or wherever you want to use it. One of the things one of the benefits of composition or of composting is that it helps soil structure, which is tilth and cation. I know those terms maybe don't make any sense to you just yet, but tilth deals with the clumps, the aggregate, when you pick up soil, you just get this huge clump, or does it kind of break up into very small pieces? Well, the humus that you put on your garden worked in with the rest of the soil will break it down from clumps to real small pieces. So it makes it better to dig in, better for roots to grow in, and different things like that. The cation deals with an electrical charge. Now, I got kind of excited about that because I do have an electrical engineering degree. So, to find out that there's actually an electric charge that's in the earth, in the soil, that helps to hold things together. Well, you want to reduce that charge, and so it works in conjunction with the soil tilth idea, so that it breaks it down. It lessens that electric charge in there. So composting, we look at this. Compost, the visual guide, we're looking at kitchen food scraps. Kitchen food scraps are also known as greens. We're going to be talking about greens and browns, nitrogen, and carbon. So those are synonymous terms. The greens are nitrogen, the browns are carbon. And those are chemicals that are important for the decomposition of whatever it is you're trying to decompose. Paper items is a brown. And I put paper items here because my compost pile is made up primarily of kitchen waste, fruits, fruit peels, different things like this. And then that's my greens. And occasionally, once or twice a year, I'll put my grass cuttings in there. But I'll tell you why that's not always good at times. But then the other is I've gone through, 2 or 3 shredders now, shredding paper. Instead of throwing away my paper, I shred it. And you don't have to worry about the paint or the ink on the paper anymore, because they have changed it so that it doesn't hurt the microbes that are in the ground, so that you can just shred the paper. And then you've got yard and garden waste. The one thing about garden or yard and garden waste, and this is another one of the considerations you have to use as far as what am I going to use for my feedstock in my compost pile. Garden and yard waste doesn't always decompose as quickly as kitchen waste does. My pile is predominantly kitchen waste, except for like once or twice a year I'll put grass in, fresh cut grass in there. So that's what makes up compost over a period of time, and it does look that nice and dark. And if you go through all the process of putting it through a sieve and drying it out, it looks like that when you get done. Otherwise, you just dig it out of your pile and put it on your garden. Okay, the benefits of composting, especially for Oklahoma, is that and this is an ideal soil makeup picture. So ideal soil has 25% air, 25% water, 45% minerals, and 5% organic matter. Composting is addressing the organic matter portion of this for the most part. One of the things that, we got all kinds of rain recently. If you have a compost pile and it's not covered, your compost pile may be very wet so that your water content could be 30–40%. Well, that takes away from the air because the mineral materials are solids, so you're not going to change that volume, but you will change the air. That will change your decomposing process. And so air and water work kind of in opposites as far as in relation to each other that we have to keep track of. There's two main ingredients chemically. One is nitrogen, and most of us, I think, know that, when you put fertilizer on your grass, you put nitrogen for the most part. That's the big number that you put in there. And so it's important, compost breaks down the nitrogen out of these kitchen waste and garden waste elements. You get it in grass, or you maybe get it in fruit rinds or in cabbage leftovers or some means. There is nitrogen in those. It's just got to be broken down into its chemical elements. And that's what decomposition does. It breaks it down into those elements. If you have insufficient air, in other words, for some reason you got more water, whoops, I do have a pointer, you have more water than air in there, you're out of balance with this 25%, you can slow that decomposition process down by as much as 90%. So it's important to try to keep those balances. And again, this is going to determine, watching this you will have to determine how much effort do I really want to put into this process. And that's one of the questions that you'll have to deal with. But it can, if you don't have things balanced properly, it'll slow things down. And instead of taking 4 or 5 weeks maybe to decompose, it'll take a year, depending upon what you have in there. And we'll address that a little bit more. So why use it then? I mean, if I've already said there's a whole bunch of problems to it and a lot of work involved, why would we want to do that? Well, there are some reasons for why we might want to do that. One is it increases the organic matter in the ground that you're working in, that you're putting your garden in, that you want to grow your vegetables. Our soil here in Oklahoma is typically only has 1% to 2% organic matter in it. And if you remember, the chart said 5 is what you're shooting for. So we are at a deficit organically as far as our soil. And this is talking generally across the state. I'm sure there's still some gardens and some lawns that have much higher. But one of the things that you want to do is for your garden is get that organic matter percentage up as high as you possibly can. Now, one of the things, and I meant to bring it and I forgot it, is Master Gardeners down on 15th Street on the north side of the fairgrounds offers a soil test. And what you do is you bring in a sampling of soil around your yard, your garden, whatever, and they send it, they charge you, I think it's up to $12 now or something like that. But they send it off to OSU in Stillwater, and they will run a test on that soil, and they will send you a test, the results of that test, which will tell you what's in your soil, what's not in your soil, what you need to add to your soil, so that it can be the best that it can be for you. And so one of the things that you would want to watch is how much organic matter is in the soil, because that's really what you're addressing when you put compost back into the soil. It takes a long time to raise that. If we're trying to go from 1% to 5%, it takes a while to do that. You just can't dump a bunch of compost on your garden and expect in the next year you're going to jump from 1 to 5%. It may only jump 0.5%, especially once it gets mixed in with all the rest of the stuff. So it takes the continual effort of adding for over a course of several years before you really begin to see an increase in that organic matter percentage. And that's one of the benefits that we really want to focus on. It attracts worms and beneficial soil microorganisms. You want these things in your soil. Now, I will tell you, sometimes I debate if I really want those worms in my soil because they attract moles. Now, moles prefer the white grub worms, but they will go after the earthworms as well, and so you may have an issue with that. I know that if I do a worms presentation in our schools, I want that tub of worms after we get done playing with them in the schools, and I'll put them in my garden because I want the worms in the garden. And because the worms make tunnels, and those tunnels allow for air to get into the earth. Those tunnels allow water to get down deeper beyond the surface. Those tunnels help give places for the roots to grow of your plants. So there's a lot of positive that comes from worms in your garden. Another is improves the soil structure, which we've addressed here a little bit, increases capacity of the soil to retain water. One of the things that, I'm sure you had runoff at your house. One of the things that happens is humus will absorb 5 times its dry weight in water weight. Another reason why you want to put that compost humus on your garden, because it'll retain water. It will not allow as much runoff to happen. There's other benefits, and we'll get to those here in a little bit. Reduces soil erosion and excessive water and nutrient runoff, helps to increase the sequestering of carbon in the soil and decrease emissions of methane. This is kind of one of my soapbox areas, because the politicians want to cut back on carbon emission out of our vehicles. They never talk about planting trees or bushes or anything like that. Well, if we were plant trees and bushes and other plants, that'll have the same effect. It'll take the carbon out of the air and put it back in the ground where it needs to be. And the ground can absorb a significant amount of carbon that it's not doing right now. So those are some of the benefits of composting, and here's some others. It loosens clay soil, allowing improved root growth. You may have clay in your yard. I know when I lived in Fort Worth, we would see gaps like that would develop in the middle of the summer because of black gumbo. And if you put enough compost on your soil and get it mixed in, it'll do away with that shrinking of the earth, so that you have a better solid earth for the plants to grow in. It increases water and nutrient retention in the soil. It suppresses soil-borne plant pathogens. This was one of the things that I learned that was really kind of interesting to me, was that soil, compost soil, will generate antibodies so that it attacks the pathogens and the bacteria, the bad bacteria that may be in the earth. For whatever reason or however it got there, but your compost will attack that and give you a better quality of soil to suppress those pathogens. It's primarily a soil amendment, but it does contain nitrogen and 40 other different chemical elements, all of which are used in the growth process of your plants. Another thing is that it will reduce compaction. That is something that happens because we walk and we make trails in our yard, go on a college campus, and they've learned not to put sidewalks in until after the first year or so. Learn where the paths of the students are. Once they learn those paths, and you can see them because the ground's compacted and there's no grass, then they build their sidewalks. And they'll be where the students are walking. But compaction is an issue and can be an issue anyway. So composting will help to keep that from happening, even in your walking over it. And then it reduces the need for synthetic fertilizers. And this is where I wanted to show this, because your synthetic fertilizers, they bring what the plant needs for nutrients, but it does nothing for the soil or the organic matter. Whereas if you use compost, and that's an added slide, it's not part of the handout. I made some adjustments today in getting ready. And I thought, I need to put this in here. But when you put compost on the soil and work it in, it's going to add organic matter, it's going to bring soil nutrients, it's going to bring microorganisms, and it's going to provide food for those microorganisms, which will in turn provide plant nutrients for your plants, whereas synthetic, it just puts the nutrients for the plants on there and that's it. So that's why I say that if you can compost, do so, and don't buy the synthetic stuff. One of the things that I also learned about synthetic, at least as far as your yard, if you don't get that in the ground, not just on the ground, but in the ground pretty quickly, you lose about 50% of the benefit of it because it evaporates, which I don't think the fertilizer industry would like me to be saying that, but that's what I found actually happens. So if you can compost, I want to encourage you to do that. So who does the work? And well, yes and no, Bob. We're going to look at that. Who does the work? We like to call and say that the FBI does the work. And the FBI starts out with fungus. And fungus breaks down the woody material, cellulose and lignin. I don't know if you can see it, but that upper right-hand picture, that's a big log, is what that is. And the white on that log is the lignin. Those are the fungus strands. I had a maple tree in my front yard, and I guess it was maybe 3 years ago, we had a pretty good storm go through and it blew the top off of my maple tree. So I wound up having to cut it down, and I got a stump grinder to come in and stump grind it for me. Went to Southwood and bought another tree, an oak tree, and they asked me how long it had been since I had taken the old tree out before this tree was going to go in, and it was, I don't know, just a few weeks. And they said, well, one thing that you may need to worry about or think about is that the decomposition of the wood from the stump grinder in the earth may not be done decomposing, and that could cause you an issue. So I went home and I started digging around in the hole, and I found some large pieces, and on some of those large pieces were some of this fungus, and it was warm to the touch. So that was kind of a good learning experience for me anyway. I did plant the tree shortly thereafter, and I haven't had any problems. It's doing well. But the lignin, the white fungus, it has two benefits. One of those is that it breaks down the big pieces that you might have in your compost pile. So if in the digging and turning of your compost pile you find some of this white fungus in there, it's supposed to be there. That's what you want to be there. Another benefit, which I thought was really kind of exciting, and I want to say, man, Lord, you got this thing worked out better than we could ever imagine. But that white lignin, what it does is it attaches to the roots of the plants, and it extends the capability of the plant to absorb nutrients and water. So if the roots go this far, then you add that fungus on there and you might double the distance that it's able to go into the soil. So it's a very positive thing. It's positive in decomposition, but it has a different function in decomposition. The B in this is bacteria, and it breaks down softer organic material, and it creates heat more so than the fungus does. So what you have in the decomposition pile is you have basically 3 temperature layers, or temperature time frames. One, it starts at ambient, and then the first one, and I forget what the name of that one is, but it goes to about 75 degrees or thereabouts. Now obviously ambient today is a lot higher than 75, but so you're jumping over that one. The next one would be ambient to 104 with mesophilia is the name of that. And then the highest one is 104 plus, and it could go to 160. And the reason why you want that is if you throw weeds or some weed seeds get into your compost pile, 130 degrees for 3 days will kill it. So you don't have to worry about putting that compost on your garden and having all these weeds pop up all of a sudden. Now, if they do, your compost pile didn't get hot enough and didn't stay hot enough long enough. So that's another thing to at least look at. And the I is invertebrates. The invertebrates devour the organic material, and they keep populations in check. So basically your invertebrates are, they have different invertebrates that they eat on, that they, like if you have aphids in your garden, you want to use, in a natural way, you want to use ladybugs, because ladybugs will eat a ton of aphids in a very short period of time, and they'll control them. Well, that's kind of what goes on here with the invertebrates. But at every temperature level, you have a different set of invertebrates. So if the temperatures go up, then the invertebrates for the lower level temperatures, they can't handle the higher temperatures, they'll die off, so you get, or they'll leave, one or the other. And so these others that like that higher temperature, then they take over. But they are doing the benefit of controlling the bad invertebrates that might get in your pile that you don't really want. Nobody's had any questions?
How do we know do we just let nature take its course in that sort of scenario, or?
The only way that I know that you can, you could just stick your hand in to the pile and it won't hurt you. I mean, if it's 130 degrees.
Can you use a thermometer?
Yes. In fact, they sell thermometers that have probes about that long. I think they could be like $30, $40 for that, but you just stick that in there and then it'll tell you what the temperature is. That's the only way that I really know how you can know where you're at. Now, you can get a feel for it if your pile, once you get it all put together, if it reduces in height, in size, there's an indication that things are doing what they're supposed to do. Because you want that pile, once you put your materials on there, your greens and your browns on that pile and get it mixed in there, you want that pile to go down, because that says that these invertebrates and the bacteria are doing their job, they're eating them, they're decomposing them. My pile at home, like I said, is predominantly kitchen waste and fruit rinds and stuff like that, and shredded paper. And I think last time I turned it was maybe 2 weeks ago, and I turned it this morning, and I put my 5-gallon bucket of kitchen waste on there and my big bag of shredded paper on there and mixed it all up. I couldn't tell that there was anything left of what I did 2 weeks ago. So it decomposed it all, and my pile has not grown a lot because it grows when I put the grass and leaves on it. That's when it grows the most. And we'll address some of that here in a little bit. But these are the insects, the fungus, the bacteria that actually do the work of decomposition. It's up to us to provide them with the ideal environment as much as possible. And we're going to talk about what that is here in just a bit. Now, one of the interesting things is that 1 teaspoon of good garden soil, especially when compost has been added, contains 100 million bacteria and 800 feet. So that's not a whole lot, but it contains a whole lot of these fungus and bacteria in particular that do the work for us. The one thing that I would encourage you to not do is build your pile on an impermeable surface. In other words, don't put it on concrete, don't put it on asphalt. I would almost say don't put it on wood, even though wood will decompose eventually, and that will help. But put it on the ground. Just start it on the ground, and that way the fungus, the bacteria, the invertebrates, they'll all come up from the ground, get into that pile, and be able to do its job. Now, if that can't happen in your yard for one reason or another, they do sell a starter that you can buy, but a better way would be just get you a shovel full of dirt out of your garden and put it on your pile and mix it in, and you'll get the benefit of these guys that will start working in there.
Could you use cardboard box as a container to do that?
Can you use a cardboard box as a container to
Start composting?
I would not, because your cardboard will decompose.
Yeah, but would it decompose the same amount at the same time as?
If you have enough of the greens in there with it, in fact, one of the things that we propose and encourage is to take cardboard and then tear it up in as small pieces as you can and put it into the compost pile, using it as a brown or as a carbon. Because you want to have nitrogen and carbon, greens and browns, and those are the two feed sources that you need to be able to feed the fungus, the bacteria, and the invertebrates, because they get their protein from those ingredients that you put in there. And then, just like you and I, when we go outside and work in the yard, we sweat, we generate heat from our body. Well, they do the same thing, except I don't know that they sweat, but they create heat. And that's where the heat that we see in there.
You have it on the ground and weeds grow up. Do you pull the weeds or you just let it?
Okay, if weeds grow up in the pile, then what? Okay.
Pull it or leave it or?
Yeah, if they grow in the pile, then what that says is that your pile is not getting hot enough, long enough to kill those seeds. But what you can do is, yeah, just pull them out. And don't put them back in a pile after you pull them out, put them in the trash in that particular case.
About the heat, if it would grow through that.
Yes, yeah, it will, because I've had some vegetables start up. I think I had a tomato plant come up once, and I mean, it's not unusual to have different plants grow in. In fact, I found a good-sized beet. I was surprised because I had put beets in my raised bed garden, and they didn't do as well as I'd hoped. So I pulled them all up and threw them in that compost pile. And noticed today it was almost the size of a baseball. So, I mean,
I know a woman.
the one I harvested wasn't even that big.
I had a woman that had cantaloupe and watermelon growing in her compost.
Yeah.
And she said it was the most tastiest.
Yeah. It will. I mean,
she's ever had.
you can let it grow because it'll grow and mature and give you some harvest probably in most cases. But if it's growing, it's saying you're not getting hot enough to kill the seeds.
Should it be in direct sun?
Should it
Does it matter?
Should it be in direct sun, your pile? My pile happens to be in the shade underneath a willow tree. It does not have to be in direct sun. In fact, there is some negative to being in the direct sun because the direct sun will tend to dry it out quicker and you will need to water it more often. It can be in direct sun though. You may, if you have to do it in direct sun, you may want to build a roof to put over it or cover it in some way so that the sun, it's more or less in the shade. Because it will impact the water in the pile. And so you'll have to monitor that.
You do like a 40% shade cloth or something like that over the top of it or something like that?
You could do that or just take a tarp and where it just blocks it all out. It doesn't need sun because all the work is being done by the fungus and the bacteria and the invertebrates. And depending upon the temperature, it's going to determine which of these groups of invertebrates in particular is working at the time. And if it gets hot, that's okay, because you want it to get hot and kill the weed seeds or any other seeds that might be in there. Okay. Oxygen, air equals oxygen equals aerobic, and basically it's just saying that you want, and well, there's two different ways that you can have a compost pile. One way is an aerobic pile, which is one where you are using oxygen in the pile to help with the decomposition process. The other one is anaerobic. Now I heard somebody over here was talking about having a big pile in your backyard, and it was, it was leaves and grass or something?
Grass and anything else comes out of the kitchen.
Oh, okay, so you are adding both greens and browns, but it's a pretty big pile. One of the things about that is that's okay, but it'll take a year or thereabouts to decompose. And then you're only going to get a portion of it to decompose because you haven't turned it to mix it up to get oxygen to all parts of it, to dry out wet spots, to wet, dry spots, you know, and just to mix things up a little bit. If the pile stays at a given level, your chances are really good that you're not decomposing your materials. And so that you'll need to do something to change that. And that's part of what we're going to look at here. Decomposition produces heat. Ideal temperature is 90 to 140 degrees that you would want to try to keep your pile functioning at. Once you start struggling to get to these temperatures, don't fight it, because basically what it's telling you is we're done. We have decomposed things so that and once the decomposition reaches a more complete state, it doesn't heat up anymore. You can add more greens and browns and that might regenerate the heat. But generally overall, if you've got a decent sized pile and it's not heating up, then you might want to start harvesting it and putting it on your garden because it's probably ready. Aerobic decomposition is the fastest way to make high quality compost. And that statement basically is saying aerobic decomposition will give you good compost in about 6 weeks. The anaerobic or the non-aerobic decomposition, it can take upwards of a year. So part of what you have to determine is how much effort do I want to put into this thing when it comes to compost. Another thing that produces no foul odors. Now you may question that, and I'll take the challenge. My wife wanted a glider. So we got a 2-seater glider, and the only place that it would go properly, because we'd already kind of built a patio, was under the willow tree. Well, if you remember, I said my compost pile's under that willow tree. So the glider's in front of the compost pile, and she was concerned about the foul odors. And I said there would be no foul odors. And so she didn't believe me, which is not unusual, but she didn't believe me. So anyway, she went out to her glider. She says, there's no smell. I don't smell anything. And the reason is because you've got a proper ratio of greens and browns and water in that pile so that it's decomposing. And the only smell you may get would be a nice earthy smell. Yes, ma'am.
So I don't get smells from my compost, but it's a cycle of flies. Like the flies would be there for a few days and then they won't be there and then like a month later they're back. Like what's up with the flies?
Well, the flies are laying eggs and they're helping to eat and decompose some of that. And they're laying eggs in the compost, and that's okay. You want that. If you see other insects, invertebrates in the pile, that's okay too. It's only when you start getting vermin, and I've got some pictures here I'll show you here, like skunks or opossums or raccoons or some of those others, and what's happening that's drawing them is that you're putting something in that compost pile that is giving off an odor. They're picking up on it, and then they're coming to visit your compost pile. But if you don't put a lot of those things, and I have a slide here we'll go over, if you don't put a lot of those things in your compost pile, you won't have the problem. And the flies and the various invertebrates and bugs that come around, that's in a good thing. That's a good thing for you. If you have a vinegar smell, typically that's going to indicate that you have insufficient oxygen in your pile. So if you have insufficient oxygen, you may find that what's happened is if you put grass or leaves in your pile, it's possible they've matted, because they are, my experience is they are really bad about matting. And if you don't turn them every so often, they'll block any moisture from getting down into the pile. So, and it doesn't matter if the grass is a green, nitrogen-filled matter that you're putting in, or a brown carbon grass that you're putting in. They both mat. And so you have to turn that mat to break it up and to allow the moisture to get down further into your pile. If you have a rotten egg smell in your pile, the pile typically is too wet in those circumstances. So the way you would deal with that is you would turn it, and you might add some carbon matter to it, paper, cardboard, stuff like that. Now, Sawdust, I have used sawdust in the past. It needs to be sawdust. I would not encourage wood chips because wood chips are too big and they'll take too long to decompose. But sawdust has a tendency to mat as well. So you have to watch those three anyway if you add them. I'm not saying don't add them. I'm just saying watch them and be willing to turn and break up the mat that has developed. Another thing is if you have an ammonia smell that comes out of it, then you have too much nitrogen, too much greens, not enough carbons. So you need to add your carbons in and turn the pile. And in the process of turning the pile is to get more oxygen into the pile as well. Even if you're turning carbons, paper, cardboard, stuff like that into the pile, you still, I forget where I was going. Sorry, I'm a senior adult. I'll claim that. I've already said this, kill weed seeds, 130 degrees for 3 days, and also talked about the having other seeds. Now, higher temperatures kill pathogens, higher temperatures kill weed seeds, and mechanics. Okay, this is probably what you came for. This is the practical. This is some of the how do we actually do this. It's what to do and how to do it is, I guess, another way of labeling that title. And what this does is there are 4 basic backyard composting, basics to composting. One is aeration, and that is turning. You're adding oxygen in. Another one is adding to the pile. You're adding your greens and your browns into the pile. The third one is moisture. You want to be sure that the pile has a moisture content of 40 to 60%. And you should have a handout in moisture test that breaks it down by percentage and what happens when you take a handful of your compost and how it responds to you. And so there's a gradation there starting at 65 or more percent content, water content, all the way down to less than 40% content. Okay, I take it you guys don't have that. It should be back there on the table. Is it not there?
We have it. This one?
Well, that's another one. But this one, I had this. It may be underneath one of those other handouts back there. I'm pretty sure it's back there. But anyway.
I'll make sure I'll email it to everybody.
Okay, if it's not hiding underneath something else. But this will give you a little bit of a breakdown how you can determine if you don't have one of those moisture probes that you can stick in the ground and it'll tell you how much moisture. I don't know, I've never used one of those, so I'm not real sure if it gives you a percentage of moisture content. If it does, then that would be another way you could potentially monitor that, would be we'll get one of those moisture probes. And then the last one is temperature. Another thing would be, do you have one bin or do you have 2 or 3 bins that you're using to make your compost with? Or are you using a tumbler bin versus a static bin? So there's all kinds of things that you can look at. So what's a gardener to do? You got so many options as far as what's going on. You should have that on your note-taking part. First of all, considerations. What are you inclined to do? Where are you at in your inclinations as far as composting? Do I want to take this on? Do I want to spend an hour with my compost pile every week? Do I want to convince my wife that this waste in the refrigerator that I'm saving for when I put it into the compost pile is really a good thing, or I use a 5-gallon bucket on my back patio, and every time we've got some waste, with a lid, and every time we have some waste, I take it out. I finally got her to the point where she'll give me a bag of waste. Instead, I'll have to be on her in the morning, so, because she likes to throw her banana peels in the trash. So I have to, every now and then, I have to ask her, is that peel in the trash? Do I have to go in the trash to get it? You know, or is it already out in the bucket? You know, so you have to deal with that in your household as far as what you want to do and what you need to do, what's involved. The space available to you. I have a postage-sized backyard. I don't have a lot of space. And so I put my pile in a back corner under this willow tree because that's all the space I've got. And so that creates some problems in and of itself, but how much space do you have? Like I said, at the Extension Center on 15th Street on the north side of the fairgrounds in Tulsa, we have 3 bins. And we will turn from bin 2 into bin 3, bin 1 into bin 2, and then start another pile in bin 1 when we do that turning. And we'll have people bring all kinds of stuff to the piles, or to the bins to be used in the piles. One thing I just thought of, the question was asked before everybody got here about putting a PVC pipe, like a 4 to 6 inch PVC pipe with holes in it, down in the middle of your pile. That's not a bad thing to do because what it does is it gets air down in that pipe and then it goes out through the holes into your compost pile. So it aids in the getting oxygen into the compost pile. That's one thing you can do. Another thing is you can just turn it a lot, and that will help. So space, what's your time commitment? You know, would you rather sit in the front room watching, I'm watching AUSL right now, softball, women's softball, pro softball, because they're on for June and July, I think it is. Or do you have some other activity or something that you would prefer doing rather than being out in the backyard? These are things you have to think about because it's going to determine exactly what you do with your compost pile and how you do with your compost pile. And what's your physical ability? A lot of young people in here, that's probably not an issue. I'm beginning to realize that as an issue. I'm only 79, so, and I don't like that. Not that I'm 79, but I don't like the fact that I got a physical issue creeping up on me. But that is another thing you got to think about because carrying a 5-gallon bucket of kitchen waste, it's not going to weigh as much as a 5-gallon bucket of water, but it's still going to be heavy. And then you got to be able to shovel things in. I mean, there's just a whole lot of stuff involved. So those are some things you need to take into consideration. How bad do I want this? And am I willing to do what I need to do what I want done? Okay. Pile configurations. There's all kinds of different piles that you can put together. This happens to be mine in the backyard, and I try to disguise it with the lattice, and it seems to work okay. And here's the glider, and this is the willow tree. And so that's mine, but it's one bin. So when I go to turn it, I dig from one side and pile on the other side, or from the back into the front, or out of the middle, and try to move it around because you want to get the compost in the whole pile as much as you possibly can. Now, you also have, this is a freestanding pile. Whoops, wrong way. This is a freestanding pile here. And I don't know if you can see it, but there is smoke, what appears to be smoke, right up here at the top of that pile. That's actually the heat that's being generated from the decomposition within the pile. Over here you've got a round fence-like structure. Under here you got a square structure. Those would be confined. Now the problem with these here is that how do you turn that? That's where you either have the ability to move, shoot, I keep pushing the wrong button. Have the ability to move one of these sides out so that you can get at it. That's where this lattice, I have to pull this out and move it over here every time I want to turn my pile or work on my pile. My pile is 3 by 3 or 3.5 by 3, and one side is open so that I can easily get in there and turn it. And I turn it with a pitchfork. You can use a pitchfork, you can use a garden fork, you could use a shovel, even though I'm not sure that how that would necessarily work as well. The other is the bin. That to me is the one that you will have the least effort to work on, work with. But those are some ways that you can have a pile in your yard, all using single bins, obviously. In mine, or with a single pile, either you pull the fencing off, set it aside, and then turn the pile and turn it back into the fence. Did that make sense? So that you're turning it, but you're moving it from one location to another location and back to the original location in the process of turning your whole pile. Generally, I try to not dig all the way to the bottom when I'm adding, in my case, because I'm trying to build up on top of the pile because the stuff that's on the bottom is pretty much done. And so I have to build on top of it. That's another one of the negative aspects of having one bin, because you don't have that ability to be able to take it from here and move it here and let it just continue to decompose and start another pile. You're starting another pile on top of the pile you have. Those are drawbacks for having a one bin or one pile type of a compost situation. Okay, size of the bin or the pile. Again, 3 by 3 is the best for hot composting. It can be up to 4 by 4, but you really don't want to get too large, because if it gets too large, then it tends to compress and you lose the oxygen, or it requires a whole lot more turning. Now, I told you about the mushroom farm up in Miami. They have concrete, I don't know what you want to call them, just huge concrete areas that, and when I say huge, I'm talking 20, 30 feet wide, 40, 50 feet deep, and maybe 20 feet tall. Well, they have piping in the bottom of those areas, and they pressure push air through those pipes up into the pile. And plus they have big front end loaders that they turn those piles into other areas on a frequent basis. So air is real important, especially if you want to do hot composting. If it's too small, then you have the real chance that the moisture will evaporate quicker, and then you'll have to water it more frequently, would be some of the other things that you would have to look at. If your pile is not shrinking, then decomposition is likely not happening. And there's a couple of reasons why that might be. One is the materials that you're adding are too big. One of the things that just kind of, I don't know, I'm still having a hard time wrapping it around my head, is that the smaller the piece, the more space there is for the invertebrates and the fungus and the bacteria to eat on. So the smaller the pile, the more moisture issues you might actually have. these are examples of turning units or tumblers. I don't have any experience with them. I know several master gardeners who do have experience with them. And basically what you do is at the doors here, you just put in what you're going to put in, and then you turn the crank. They're cleaner, than having a pile, but you are limited on the amount of compost that you're going to be able to generate with some of these. And these things are also expensive. I got online today, and I think the cheapest ones I saw were maybe $75. And the better ones were like $250, $300. They're not cheap. So it's cheaper to buy a little bit of fence and for, I don't know, $15 or so, and build you a pile like off of that. Size of feedstock for the compost pile. Guiding thought: the smaller the pieces, the quicker they decompose. So if you keep that in mind, and that becomes your guiding thought as far as putting feedstock into your pile, keep it as small as possible. Shred the leaves with the mower or a shredder. And that would be another thing. If you if you really want to get into it, you may want to invest in a shredder, because shredded leaves will decompose quicker and better than will whole leaves. The same way when you take your woody garden waste, if you can shred it, it will decompose quicker. I pulled some of it out of mine this morning because it's been in there for several weeks. You can't even tell it was decomposing at all. So I try to stay away from as much woody type garden waste as possible, because it takes longer for that to decompose. Whereas everything else is decomposing in just 2-3 weeks, I'd rather not have something that's going to take 6 months to decompose in there. Cut whole fruits and veggies into pieces when you can, and heavy fruit rinds 2 to 3 inch pieces. Now, I hope you can see that. What does that chart tell you? Okay, the smaller the pieces, the hotter it gets, because there's a temperature, 1 inch pieces, and the shorter, because it's shorter time it takes to decompose. And that's not as clear, but it is true. And so that's kind of one of those things that I think would be helpful. Okay, question about the mixtures. Mixture of carbon and nitrogen, 3-to-1 ratio. You will see in some publications it'll say 2-to-1. We typically use 3-to-1. 3-to-1 is a volume measure. And it's important that you see it that way. One reason, 2 to 3 parts brown, 1 part green. So your carbon, 2 to 3 parts carbon and 1 part nitrogen. And some of the browns, leaves, small branches, paper towels, napkins, paper sacks, newspaper, nutshells, wood chips, sawdust, and old brown grass clippings. So if you cut your grass and you catch it, put it in, and you don't automatically put it into your pile, put it into its own pile on the side, let it turn brown, and then it becomes a carbon. But if you want to catch it, and it's fresh green clippings, you can put it on there, but then it's a nitrogen and it's a green. So that's one distinction as far as grass clippings. But again, the problem with grass clippings is they mat. But kitchen scraps, potato peels, celery stalks, tomatoes, etc., coffee grounds, tea leaves or tea bags, those are good to put into the compost pile, because they like, from the standpoint of it being the nitrogen and the green, it does good stuff to your pile. That's another one of the things. My wife likes to just throw it in the trash. I have in another area in my house, in my office area, I have a shredder, and I have a pile of trash paper that I don't want to throw out, but I do want to shred because I want to use it as my carbon. And so then I have to sit there at the shredder for a while shredding paper. Once I get a bag full then and get a bucket full of greens, then I go and mix it up in the compost pile. The question has to do with inks on paper. It used to be that some inks on paper were not good, and you would not want to put anything that had an ink image on paper or cardboard or something like that in a that's no longer an issue. They've changed the makeup of the paint of the ink so that now it does not hurt the decomposers, but it actually can be something positive for them. So
You have a bunch of cardboard boxes.
yeah, don't just right. You don't have to worry about the ink on them at all. Just tear them up as small as you can. Another thing that you might, pumpkins, they decompose really good and quick. So instead of throwing at Halloween your pumpkins out, go to your neighbors and ask them to give you their pumpkins where they're done with them and put them on your compost pile. Get as much of the seeds out of them as you can ahead of time, because if you don't get the temperatures up, you're going to have pumpkin coming up in your compost pile. But pumpkins are really good for a compost pile. Paper volume can be pretty big, and I mean maybe it weighs 5 pounds, but you get a 5-gallon bucket of kitchen waste and it could easily weigh 20-25 pounds, but you're looking at volume. Now there is also another way that you can look at this, and that is from a chemical basis. And if you really get into the math, if you are really somebody that likes math and likes to deal with complicated formulas and all this kind of stuff, then you may want to use the carbon to nitrogen ratio chemically. And then you need to get a chart that tells you what the carbon nitrogen ratio is for all these different things that you're putting together in your pile, and then through a complicated equation, put all that in there, because then you got to take into consideration not just volume but weight and that chemical makeup of what it is, because everything has a different C to N ratio. That's why I don't recommend you do that. I recommend you use the 3-to-1 volume. That we can pretty well do that in our head, and it works. One thing about composting, it's not critical that you be exact in it. I mean, you could almost say it's very forgiving. I mean, I might have times where I put in more greens than browns, and next time I put in more browns and greens, it all balances out and it still works. So don't feel like it's got to be just critical as far as, okay, I've got to have 3 of these to 1 of these every time, otherwise I mix everything, I mix up my ratios. That's not the case. Another thing that you might think of is eggshells. Eggshells will not decompose, but they do add calcium into the pile and for the invertebrates, because they need the calcium. I have heard of people who will take the eggshells, put them in their blender, run them through the blender, add a little water to it, and then put it in the pile. I don't tend to do that. So one thing, materials, and I don't know if you can read that, I hope you can, materials that you do not want, or let me rephrase that. Materials that we as master gardeners do not recommend that you use in a backyard compost pile. And one of those is up here: meat, bones, fish, dairy products, cooking oil, fat, grease. They create odors that attract pests and potential pathogens. So you want to stay away from those things. It's not, if you had a big enough production like what's going on in Miami, you could probably, you could probably use those things and put them in there. But in a backyard compost, we recommend you don't do that. I'm sorry?
I said it stinketh.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, hard to kill weeds, bindweed, quackgrass, weeds that have gone to seed. You don't want to put those in there because then you definitely have to get your temperatures up to 130 degrees or more for 3 days to kill those weeds, or those seeds. And so that's why you don't want to put that kind of stuff in there. And then this, cat, dog, human waste, pathogen prone. We have one lady who evidently she has a couple of horses, and she has asked about using horse manure. And the answer that she was given said, no, we don't recommend it. It's too rich nitrogen, too hot, and if it's not decomposed properly, it will tend to burn your plants. And so we recommend that you don't do that. Now, I told you about this class that we do. I think I told you anyway, we would start and we encourage people, if they could get it, emu waste, manure. That stuff is supposed to be very, very good. It's almost at a state, even before decomposition, to be equal to what you get at decomposition. So to add emu waste is positive. Another thing I saw on the signal communication that some of you have chickens, and what I found in relation to that is that we recommend you don't use chicken waste. It can be used, but it has the potential for the pathogens Salmonella and E. coli. And so unless it's decomposed properly, you have the potential of those things being added into the soil and then getting into your plants. So we don't recommend either of those manures as well. Inorganic waste, plastic, metals, chemicals, paints, etc. Okay, I wanted to break this out where it says unsure, don't decompose it or don't compost it. I want to break that out and put that as a separate line on there, and just didn't get around to it. But if you don't know or don't question or have a question, don't do it. Just err on the side of safety and don't do it. Okay. Here's why you don't want to add some of these, is that you get the opossum, you get the raccoon, you get the skunk, because they get attracted to those piles if there's any kind of smell there that they like. Getting oxygen to the decomposers, aeration. This is where you're going to turn it, and you can see the guy trying to turn it in this here. I don't like that because it's hard to turn from reaching over that. Now, if you can make a square bin, leave one end open, it makes it a lot simpler to do. Now, they do sell, you can buy these gadgets here online, and they cost you about $75, but it is a way where you just jam it down into the pile, and you just kind of spin it and pull it up, and these little gadgets here, when you push it down, they're folded up against the pole, but as you pull it up, they fall out so that they grab some of the compost and the mixture that you have there, and so it mixes it. It helps to mix it from that standpoint. Turning is important. Adds oxygen to the pile, reinvigorates the invertebrates, causing the heat to go up, redistributes moisture and temperature pockets, loosens compacted areas, exposes new materials to the microbes, speeds up decomposition, redistributes materials in the pile. So I hope that when you start your compost pile tomorrow morning, that you'll consider turning as an important ingredient in that compost pile. I would say if you turned it once a week, that's a good time frame to look at for turning, because you allow the microbes and the invertebrates that are in the pile to do some work, and you allow things to kind of settle a little, and then you go in and turn it and kind of give everybody a kickstart to start over, and you add oxygen back into the pile at that point as well. Okay, moisture, and this is where I was going to talk about that moisture chart, so hopefully everybody's got a copy of that now. Too dry, bacterial activity will slow or cease. Too wet, loss of air in the pile will lead to anaerobic conditions. As wet as a squeezed out sponge, that's the term that you'll come across the most. If it's too dry, add water. Turn the pile. If it's too wet, add browns. Every time I add to my pile, I will dig into the pile and move it out, and then that hole that I leave, then I put it in there, and then I cover it. You want to cover it so that you don't have the issues of cats, dogs, animals that are picking up on the smells, because the covering will help to suppress the smells in there. Yeah, and then I'd take a shovelful out of your garden or whatever and put that in there to start with, so that you have some. That way you're adding the microbes into that mix, because there may not be microbes in that fruit and paper mixture that you put together. So you want some soil to throw in there, because you know that the bacteria and the fungus and the invertebrates are going to be there. Thank you. Appreciate you asking me to come.